The grand hall of the Vicarian embassy on Earth was silent, the weight of 1,000 unspoken words settling like a mist over the gathering. Arava stood tall, her silver-hued skin shimmering faintly under the artificial lights. Her elegant, crystalline robes marked her as a dignitary of high status within the Vicarian alliance. Yet, despite her regal appearance, her expression was impassive, her sharp emerald eyes betraying none of the turmoil beneath. She glanced at the human standing before her. Elias Carter. His dark brown hair was slightly unruly, and his sharp, inquisitive eyes gave away his profession before anyone could introduce him, a scientist. He didn't seem particularly remarkable by Vicarian standards, shorter than the average Vicarian male, less physically imposing, and far too casual in his posture. Yet here he was, the man chosen to be her husband. Her husband. Arava's fingers tightened around the ceremonial binding scroll she held, the delicate parchment feeling far heavier than it should. This was no ordinary union, and both of them knew it. The marriage was not born of love or mutual desire. It was a political agreement, a desperate move by both Earth and Vicaria to maintain peace after years of tense negotiations and skirmishes. Elias cleared his throat, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "Well, this is unconventional," he said, his tone half joking, half nervous. His accent carried the soft twang of the western human regions, something that sounded foreign yet oddly melodic to Arava's ears. She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Unconventional is an understatement," she replied, her voice calm and measured. The Vicarian language was musical, but her grasp of the human tongue was precise, almost too perfect. The officiant, a human representative in a formal suit, stepped forward to begin the ceremony. He spoke of unity, hope, and the importance of setting an example for their respective worlds. Arava barely listened. Her thoughts were elsewhere, focusing instead on how her life had led to this moment. She had spent decades training as a diplomat, preparing to serve her people, to uphold their traditions, and ensure their survival in a galaxy teetering on chaos. And now she was being asked to marry a human. Someone she barely knew, someone so fundamentally different from her in every possible way. Elias, meanwhile, was fighting his own internal battle. He hadn't expected this assignment. He was a scientist, not a politician. And yet, the weight of humanity's future rested on his shoulders. Marrying Arava wasn't just a responsibility, it was a duty. When the officiant asked them to seal their vows, Arava extended her slender, metallic-hued hand, her expression neutral. Elias took it hesitantly, his palm warm against her cool skin. As they completed the ritual, a wave of applause erupted from the gathered delegates, but neither of them felt victorious. This was only the beginning of their story, one that neither could predict but both would soon be unable to escape. Arava stepped into her new residence on Earth, her eyes scanning the space with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. The house was human in every sense, functional, but lacking the elegance and efficiency she was accustomed to on Vicaria. The walls were painted in muted tones, the furniture was bulky and mismatched, and a strange machine in the corner hummed softly. "What is that?" she asked, pointing to the rectangular device. Elias glanced up from unpacking a box. "That's a refrigerator," he explained. "It keeps food cold." Arava raised a delicate eyebrow. "On Vicaria, we use stasis chambers for preservation. This seems primitive." Elias chuckled. "Well, welcome to Earth, where we're just barely getting by with our primitive technology." The sarcasm in his voice didn't escape her, but she chose not to engage. Instead, she walked to the window, observing the bustling human city outside. The air was thick with noise, vehicles honking, people shouting, and a general hum of activity. It was chaotic compared to the serene and orderly environments of her homeworld. Elias joined her by the window, leaning casually against the frame. "It's a lot to take in, huh?" "It is overwhelming," Arava admitted, though her tone was as measured as ever. She would never allow herself to show weakness, not even to him. "Well, Elias said with a small smile. Give it time. You might even grow to like it. Arava doubted that very much. The first clash came that evening during dinner. Elias had prepared a simple human meal, roasted vegetables, some sort of grain, and a dish he called chicken. He placed the plates on the table with a flourish, clearly proud of his efforts. Arava studied the food with skepticism. What is this? Dinner. Elias replied, already taking a bite. This chicken, she said, poking at the meat with her fork. Is it an animal? Yeah, Elias said, realizing too late that this might be a problem. Is that an issue? In Vicarian culture, consuming animal flesh is considered barbaric, she said, setting her fork down. We rely on synthesized proteins and nutrient-rich plants. Elias scratched the back of his neck, feeling awkward. Well, I didn't know. Next time, I'll make something more plant-based. Her lips pressed into a thin line. That would be appreciated. Over the next few days, small clashes like these became the norm. Arava's precise and disciplined nature often clashed with Elias's more casual, flexible approach to life. She found his habit of leaving items scattered around the house infuriating, while he couldn't understand her obsession with strict schedules and routines. One evening, as Arava meticulously rearranged the books on the shelf, Elias finally sighed. You know, not everything has to be perfect all the time. It is not about perfection, she replied coolly. It is about efficiency. Well, sometimes life is messy, Elias shot back. Arava paused, her hand still on the books. For the first time, she considered his words. Life on Earth was messy, chaotic, and unpredictable. And maybe, just maybe, she would have to learn to live with it. As the days went by, their clashes began to reveal something unexpected. Beneath their differences lay a strange sense of mutual respect, an unspoken understanding that, despite everything, they were both trying their best to adapt. Neither of them would admit it, but in their own ways, they were starting to see each other differently. The council chambers buzzed with urgency as Arava and Elias sat side by side, the tension in the room nearly palpable. News of the recent attacks on joint human-Vicarian outposts had shaken both governments. The fragile peace between their species was teetering on the edge of collapse, and everyone knew it. Arava listened intently as a human military officer delivered his report. The attack on Outpost Sigma left 23 dead and several injured. Surveillance indicates the use of Vicarian technology, but no faction has claimed responsibility. At the mention of Vicarian involvement, all eyes turned to Arava. She remained calm, her expression a mask of professionalism, but inside, her thoughts churned. This is a calculated attempt to sabotage our alliance, she said, her voice clear and steady. I can assure you, the Vicarian alliance has no interest in war. We gain nothing from conflict. The officer frowned. With all due respect, how can we be certain? Your people's technology was used in this attack. Elias, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. And how do we know it wasn't stolen or reverse engineered? Jumping to conclusions isn't going to help anyone. Arava glanced at him, surprised by his defense. It was a small gesture, but it didn't go unnoticed. The meeting ended with no resolution, and as they left the chamber, Arava felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The peace treaty she had worked so hard to secure was unraveling before her eyes. Later that evening, Arava found Elias in the living room, poring over data on his tablet. He looked up as she entered, his face a mixture of determination and exhaustion. You've been quiet, he said. That's not like you. I am, reflecting, she admitted, sitting down across from him. The situation is more precarious than I anticipated. Elias nodded. It's bad, no doubt about it. But blaming each other isn't the answer. She studied him for a moment, noting the worry etched on his face. Despite their differences, Elias had proven himself to be more thoughtful and capable than she had initially believed. Your words in the council today, she said, her tone softer than usual. They were unexpected. He shrugged. We're in this together, right? If we can't trust each other, what's the point? Arava hesitated, then nodded. You are correct. Trust is essential, even if it is difficult to maintain. The next day, their investigation into the attacks began. Arava's diplomatic connections provided access to classified Vicarian intelligence, while Elias used his expertise to analyze the data. Together, they uncovered a troubling pattern. The attacks were too precise, too calculated, to be random acts of violence. It's almost like someone wants us to believe the Vicarians are behind this, Elias said, frowning at the screen. Agreed. Arava said, but who? And why? Their questions hung heavy in the air, unanswered but demanding resolution. For the first time, Arava felt the faint stirrings of something unfamiliar: trust. She didn't fully understand it yet, but she knew one thing: if they were going to uncover the truth and save the Alliance, she would need Elias by her side. Arava adjusted the straps of her environmental suit, her sharp emerald eyes scanning the barren landscape of the remote planet they had crash-landed on. The horizon stretched endlessly, a sea of jagged red-hued rocks under a sky that shimmered with a faint golden haze. It was beautiful in a way, but the danger was undeniable. This is not ideal, Arava muttered, her voice tight, as she turned to Elias. No kidding, Elias replied, pulling a small survival kit from the damaged escape pod. His face was smeared with dirt, and his usually calm demeanor was tinged with frustration. If we don't find shelter soon, the temperature drop tonight could be the least of our problems. Their diplomatic transport ship had been ambushed en route to a neutral zone where they were meant to gather more intelligence. Forced to eject in a tiny pod, they had crash-landed on this uncharted world. The planet's harsh environment and lack of communication signals had turned their survival into a pressing concern. Hours later, after traversing the rugged terrain, they found a shallow cave nestled into a rocky hillside. It wasn't much, but it offered protection from the biting wind and the possibility of safety for the night. Elias set down their supplies and began unpacking a portable power unit to provide heat and light. Meanwhile, Arava scanned the area with her handheld bioscanner, searching for any signs of life, hostile or otherwise. There's no movement nearby, she said, though her expression remained wary. Good, Elias replied, wiping sweat from his brow. We need a win today. As the power unit buzzed to life, casting a faint warmth and light across the cave, they both settled down, their exhaustion catching up to them. For a while, silence filled the space, broken only by the soft hum of the heater. You're surprisingly resourceful for a scientist, Arava remarked, breaking the quiet. Elias looked up from his work, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. That's supposed to be a compliment. It is an observation, she said simply, though her tone carried a hint of something softer. He chuckled, leaning back against the cave wall. I'll take it, and you're surprisingly adaptable for someone who plans everything down to the second. Arava tilted her head, considering his words. Adaptability is a necessity in diplomacy. Though I admit, this situation is testing my limits. Elias's smile widened. Welcome to the human experience. That night, as they sat around a small heat generator, the faint light flickering across the cave walls, they found themselves talking more openly. Elias shared stories of his childhood on Earth, of the messy, chaotic, but deeply human experiences that shaped him. Arava, in turn, spoke of her rigorous upbringing as a diplomat, where emotion was seen as a weakness and perfection was the standard. I envy your people sometimes, she admitted quietly. You embrace imperfection. You find strength in it. Elias looked at her, surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. It's not always a strength, but it's real. In that moment, the divide between them felt just a little smaller. They were still worlds apart, but for the first time, it felt like they were beginning to meet in the middle. As the temperature outside plummeted and the wind howled against the cave, Arava and Elias realized something unspoken. In this harsh and alien world, they only had each other. And that fragile, growing trust might be the key to their survival. The golden sunrise cast long shadows across the barren landscape, but neither Arava nor Elias paid much attention. They were too busy preparing for another day of survival on the unforgiving planet. The previous night's uneasy camaraderie lingered in the air, unspoken but palpable. Arava checked her bioscanner once more, her sharp features focused. There's still no sign of life within a 5-kilometer radius, she reported, her tone neutral. That's good news, Elias said as he adjusted his makeshift pack, loaded with what few supplies they had salvaged. But we're going to run out of water in 2 days tops. We need to find a source soon. Arava glanced at him, her expression unreadable. You are remarkably calm for someone in such a precarious situation. Elias gave her a small, tired smile. I've learned that panicking doesn't solve anything. Besides, I've been in tough spots before. She raised an eyebrow. Not like this, I assume. No, he admitted, his smile fading. Not like this. As the day wore on, they trekked across the rugged terrain, their conversation sparse but not entirely devoid of warmth. Arava remained focused on scanning for resources, while Elias kept an eye on their surroundings, watching for anything that might pose a threat or offer salvation. At one point, Elias stumbled on a loose rock, nearly falling. Arava caught his arm with surprising speed and steadiness. You should watch your step, she said, her voice carrying a rare hint of concern. Thanks for the tip, he replied, brushing himself off. Guess I owe you one. She tilted her head. We are a team now. Your survival ensures mine, and vice versa. It is logical to assist each other. Elias smirked. Always so practical, aren't you? Her lips twitched, almost forming a smile. It is my nature. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, they found another small cave to take shelter in. Exhausted, they settled down, sharing the last of their rations. Elias leaned back against the cold rock wall, his gaze distant. You know, when I was a kid, I used to stare at the stars and dream about exploring other worlds. Funny how dreams don't always turn out the way you expect. Arava looked at him, her curiosity piqued. Did you imagine this? Being stranded on an alien planet with someone who thinks I'm messy and inefficient? He chuckled. Not exactly. Her expression softened slightly. You underestimate yourself. You have shown adaptability and resourcefulness, qualities I did not anticipate. Elias blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected compliment. Thanks, I think. And you? Do you ever dream about something beyond duty and perfection? For a long moment, Arava said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she replied, I used to. Elias didn't press her, sensing the vulnerability behind her words. Instead, he offered her a reassuring smile. That night, as they lay under the faint glow of the planet's twin moons, the barriers between them felt thinner. The silence was no longer uncomfortable but companionable. In their shared struggle, Arava and Elias were beginning to see each other in a new light, not as an alien and a human forced into an alliance, but as two individuals, each carrying their own burdens and strengths. And for the first time, Arava wondered if the human concept of imperfection might hold a beauty she had overlooked. Arava and Elias trudged through the jagged terrain, their steps heavy but purposeful. The discovery earlier that day, a small hidden structure nestled within the cliffs, had given them a renewed sense of urgency. The building was ancient but equipped with technology far beyond what either of them expected to find on an uncharted planet. Who you think built this? Elias asked, his voice breaking the heavy silence as they approached the structure. Uncertain, Arava replied, her bioscanner beeping softly in her hand. But its energy signatures are active, which means someone, or something, has maintained it. Elias couldn't help but shiver at the thought. Let's hope it's friendly. The entrance to the building was covered in moss-like growth, its metallic surface reflecting the golden light of the twin suns. As they stepped inside, the temperature dropped noticeably, and the faint hum of machinery echoed through the narrow corridors. "This isn't abandoned," Elias muttered, running his hand along the smooth wall. Arava nodded, her sharp eyes scanning every detail. "Stay alert. We do not know what lies ahead." The deeper they ventured, the more the structure revealed its secrets. Walls etched with alien symbols hinted at its purpose, while glowing panels displayed streams of data in a language neither of them could decipher. Elias stopped in front of a console, his curiosity getting the better of him. "This tech, it's not Vicarian, but it's not human either. It's something else." Arava crouched beside him, her expression serious. "The energy readings here are highly advanced. If we can decode this system, it may provide answers, not just about this planet, but about the attacks on our alliance." As she spoke, her bioscanner beeped urgently, and a warning flashed on the screen. "Someone's here," she said sharply, rising to her feet. Elias grabbed a small device from their pack, a makeshift defense tool he had rigged using parts from their crash pod. "How close?" "Close enough," Arava replied, her voice low. "Be ready." Moments later, a faint noise echoed down the corridor. Footsteps. Arava motioned for Elias to stay back as she positioned herself near the entrance. Her sleek, crystalline blade shimmered faintly in her hand, a weapon as elegant as it was deadly. The figure that appeared was humanoid, but clad in a strange armored suit that obscured its features. It paused, its visor scanning the room before speaking in a distorted voice. "You should not be here." Arava's grip tightened on her blade. "Who are you? And why are you on this planet?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised a weapon-like device, aiming it directly at them. Elias acted quickly, activating his defense tool and firing a burst of energy that knocked the weapon from the figure's hand. Arava moved swiftly, disarming the intruder with precise, fluid motions. "Talk," she demanded, her blade at the figure's throat. After a tense moment, the figure spoke again. "You are meddling in forces you do not understand. Leave now, or your worlds will pay the price." Elias exchanged a glance with Arava, his heart pounding. Whoever this was, they weren't just a random scavenger. They were connected to something much larger, something that threatened both Earth and Vicaria. As they secured the figure and began searching for answers in the building systems, one thing became clear. The conspiracy went far deeper than they had imagined. And if they didn't act quickly, it could spell disaster for both their worlds. But for the first time, Arava felt a strange sense of confidence, not in herself alone, but in the human by her side. Together, they would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The alien figure sat restrained in the corner of the room, its armored suit now partially dismantled. Sparks flickered from the edges of the suit as Arava worked swiftly, her sharp eyes focused on extracting its data core. Elias stood nearby, watching both her and the captive with a mixture of awe and unease. "You think this will tell us who's behind the attacks?" Elias asked, breaking the tense silence. "It should," Arava replied without looking up. "This individual is not acting alone. Their equipment and presence here suggest a larger operation." The captive, now unmasked, revealed pale, featureless skin and deep-set, glowing eyes. Its gaze burned with hatred. "You cannot stop what is coming," it hissed. Elias frowned. "What's coming? Tell us." The alien only sneered. "You're both pawns in a game far beyond your understanding." Arava ignored the taunt and extracted the data core with a final twist of her tools. The small glowing orb pulsed faintly in her hand. "We'll see how much of your game we can uncover with this," she said coldly. The pair retreated to a nearby chamber, where Arava connected the data core to a portable decryption device. Streams of alien code filled the screen, and she worked methodically to decode it. Elias leaned over her shoulder, his curiosity piqued. "Anything yet?" he asked. "Patience," she replied. This level of encryption is sophisticated, but not impossible to break. Minutes turned into an hour, and then, finally, Arava's eyes widened. "There," she said, pointing at a string of decoded information. Elias squinted at the screen. "It's a star map. And coordinates." "Yes," Arava confirmed. "These coordinates point to a hidden base in neutral space. It's likely the central hub for whoever is orchestrating the attacks." Elias's expression darkened. "So what's the plan?" "We can't just sit on this information." Arava hesitated. She knew what the logical course of action was: to return to their respective governments and report their findings. But something about the situation felt too urgent to wait for bureaucracy to take over. "We go there," she said firmly. Elias blinked. "Just the two of us? That sounds like a suicide mission." "Do you have a better idea?" she countered. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "No, but we're going to need a solid plan." Their argument was cut short by a sudden explosion outside the structure. The ground shook, and dust rained from the ceiling. "They found us," Arava said, her voice grim. Elias grabbed the decryption device as Arava armed herself. Together, they sprinted down the corridors, the sound of approaching footsteps echoing behind them. As they emerged into the open air, they were met by a small squad of heavily armed figures, their weapons trained on them. "Elias, stay behind me," Arava ordered, her crystalline blade already glowing with energy. "I'm not just going to hide." He shot back, raising his makeshift defense tool. The ensuing battle was chaotic. Arava moved like a dancer, her strikes precise and deadly. Elias, though less graceful, used his resourcefulness to create distractions and disable their attackers' equipment. By the time the skirmish ended, the ground was littered with unconscious foes. Both Arava and Elias were bruised and breathing hard, but they were alive. As they stood amidst the wreckage, Elias looked at Arava and smiled faintly. "You know, for someone who said I was inefficient, I think I held my own." Arava allowed herself a rare smile. "You did, surprisingly well." For a moment, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. A connection forged not by politics or necessity, but by mutual respect and trust. The path ahead was dangerous, but for the first time, neither of them felt alone. Together, they would confront the heart of the conspiracy, no matter what it took. The coordinates from the decrypted data core led Arava and Elias to the edge of neutral space, where the faint glow of a hidden station emerged against the backdrop of distant stars. The base was enormous, a sprawling network of interconnected structures shrouded in shadows. It pulsed faintly with energy, like a living, breathing organism. "Are we really doing this?" Elias asked, his voice tight with nerves as he piloted their stolen vessel closer to the station. "Do you see another option?" Arava replied, her gaze locked on the base. Her expression was calm, but the tension in her voice betrayed her unease. "If we delay, the conspiracy will escalate. We must act now." Elias exhaled, gripping the controls tightly. "I hope you've got a plan." Arava turned to him, her emerald eyes serious. "We infiltrate, gather evidence, and broadcast it to both our governments. If we expose them, they'll lose the element of secrecy. And if we get caught—" She hesitated for only a moment. "Then we must ensure the data reaches someone who can act on it." Elias nodded. No pressure, then. Docking with the station was the easy part. The vessel's stolen transponder codes allowed them entry, but once inside, the enormity of their task became clear. The station was teeming with activity, alien figures moving purposefully through its halls, armed guards stationed at every corner. Elias adjusted his stolen uniform nervously. "I'm not exactly blending in here." "Keep your head down and follow my lead," Arava instructed, her posture confident and composed. She wore a similar disguise, her movements fluid enough to pass as one of the station's operatives. They navigated the corridors carefully, avoiding direct confrontation. Arava's bioscanner guided them toward the central command hub, where they hoped to find incriminating data. Inside the hub, the walls were lined with glowing panels displaying information in an array of alien languages. Arava immediately began downloading files while Elias worked to disable the station's surveillance systems. "This is bigger than we thought," Arava murmured as streams of data scrolled across her device. They'd been planning this for years, systematically sabotaging the Alliance to incite war. Elias frowned. "Who's funding this? And why?" Arava's expression darkened. "A faction within the Vicarian government is involved. They believe domination is the only path to survival. But they've also partnered with rogue human groups who profit from war." Elias clenched his fists. "So it's greed and fear driving all of this." Typical. Suddenly, the alarms blared, a piercing sound that echoed through the station. Arava and Elias froze, their eyes meeting. "They found us," she said grimly. Elias grabbed the drive with the downloaded data. "We need to get out of here now." Their escape was chaotic. Guards flooded the corridors, weapons raised. Arava moved like a blur, her crystalline blade slicing through opponents with precision, while Elias used the station's systems to create distractions and disable security protocols. They barely made it back to their ship, the sound of alarms and shouts still echoing behind them. As they launched into space, the station's defenses came online, firing relentlessly. Elias piloted with desperate precision, dodging beams of energy. "We're not going to make it," he shouted over the noise. "Hold steady," Arava said, her voice steady despite the chaos. She activated a device she had rigged earlier, a small EMP pulse. The station's defenses flickered and fell silent, giving them just enough time to escape into hyperspace. As they drifted in the safety of deep space, both of them slumped in their seats, exhausted but alive. "We got the data," Elias said, holding up the drive. "Now what?" Arava looked at him, her expression softening. "Now we save our worlds." For the first time, Elias saw something in her eyes he hadn't noticed before: trust, and perhaps even admiration. In that moment, despite the danger ahead, they knew they were no longer just an alliance of necessity. They were a team, bound by a shared determination to uncover the truth and protect the fragile peace they had both come to value. The data they retrieved from the station was damning. As Arava and Elias reviewed the files on their ship's secure terminal, the full scope of the conspiracy became horrifyingly clear. The rogue faction within the Vicarian government had orchestrated the attacks, funded by human war profiteers eager to exploit the chaos. Plans for further sabotage were already underway, targeting key diplomatic and military installations. "This will end the alliance if they succeed," Arava said, her voice heavy with the weight of the discovery. Elias leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "Then we have to stop them. But how do we even get this to the right people? If we transmit it, they'll intercept it before anyone can see it." Arava nodded. "We have to deliver it in person, to someone we trust." Elias frowned. "And you trust? Who exactly?" "Everyone in power seems to have their hands dirty in this mess." She hesitated, her gaze distant. "There is one Vicarian elder, Minister Telvar, who opposes the war faction. He will listen. But reaching him will be dangerous." Elias sighed. "When has anything we've done not been dangerous?" The next leg of their journey took them into Vicarian space, where tensions were at their peak. As they approached the Vicarian homeworld, their stolen ship's credentials triggered an alert. Within moments, they were pursued by patrol ships, their sleek, crystalline designs glinting ominously in the dark void. "Hang on," Elias shouted, gripping the controls tightly as he piloted their ship through a nearby asteroid field. Laser fire lit up the darkness, the explosions sending debris flying in all directions. Arava worked quickly at the secondary console, rerouting power to shields and jamming enemy communications. "They're trying to call reinforcements. We don't have much time." Elias cursed under his breath as the ship shuddered from a near hit. I don't think we're going to make it. Arava glanced at him, her jaw set. We have to. Just as they cleared the asteroid field, a direct hit rocked their ship, knocking out half their systems. Alarms blared, and smoke filled the cockpit. Elias struggled to keep the ship stable. We're losing power. We're not going to reach the surface in one piece. Arava made a decision in an instant. Elias, take the data and the escape pod. You'll have a better chance on your own. What? No way. He protested, his eyes wide. Listen to me, she said firmly, grabbing his arm. You're human. They'll hesitate to fire on you if you're alone. I'll stay and draw their attention. Elias's throat tightened. You'll be killed. Perhaps, she admitted, her voice softening. But the alliance, the peace we fought for, is worth more than one life. You must go. Reluctantly, Elias climbed into the pod, clutching the drive containing the vital data. As the pod launched, he watched through the small window as Arava piloted the damaged ship toward the Vicarian patrols, drawing their fire. Elias's heart ached as the ship exploded in the distance, a brilliant flash of light against the black void. When the pod crash-landed on the Vicarian homeworld, Elias was found and taken into custody. With the data drive hidden in his suit, he demanded an audience with Minister Telvar. As he stood before the elder, bruised but defiant, he delivered the evidence Arava had sacrificed herself to protect. This, he said, holding up the drive, is the truth. It's the only thing that can save us all. Telvar's expression was grave as he accepted the drive. Let us hope it is not too late. Elias's heart was heavy with grief, but he knew one thing. Arava's sacrifice would not be in vain. Her courage had inspired him, and he vowed to see their mission through to the end. For her, for their worlds, and for the fragile peace they had come to cherish. The council chamber was filled with tense silence as the holographic projection flickered to life, displaying the damning evidence Elias had delivered. Minister Telvar stood at the center, his expression grave as he addressed the gathered leaders of the Vicarian Alliance and Earth's representatives. These files, Telvar began, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of responsibility, revealed the truth about the attacks that nearly destroyed our fragile peace. Members of our own ranks, driven by fear and greed, sought to undermine this alliance, and they were aided by human collaborators with their own selfish agendas. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the chamber. The assembled leaders exchanged uneasy glances, the gravity of the revelation sinking in. Elias stood off to the side, bruised and exhausted but determined. His eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign that the truth was making an impact. His heart ached for Arava, who had given everything to ensure this moment could happen. Telvar continued, his tone firm. These individuals have been identified and will face justice, but this conspiracy serves as a stark reminder of how close we came to losing everything. It is a testament to the courage of those who risked their lives to bring this truth to light. Elias's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to tell them about Arava, not just her sacrifice, but her unwavering belief in the alliance. But for now, he stayed silent, letting the evidence speak for itself. In the days that followed, arrests were made, and the conspirators were dismantled. News of the truth spread across both Vicarian and human territories, igniting a wave of public outcry against those who had sought to profit from war. Elias was hailed as a hero by both sides, though he found little solace in the recognition. His mind was consumed by memories of Arava, her sharp wit, her quiet strength, and the way she had started to see the beauty in humanity, despite their flaws. One evening, as he sat alone in a quiet room overlooking the Vicarian capital, Minister Telvar entered. The elder's gaze was kind but solemn. You have done a great service to both our peoples, Elias Carter, Telvar said, taking the seat across from him, and I understand the weight of your loss. Elias nodded, his throat tight. She believed in this, more than anyone. She gave everything for it. Telvar placed a hand on his shoulder. Her sacrifice will not be forgotten. and neither will yours. Weeks later, during a joint ceremony held on a neutral world, representatives from Earth and Vacaria signed a renewed treaty, one that promised not just peace but cooperation in rebuilding the trust that had been broken. As Elias stood among the crowd, watching the historic moment, he felt a sense of bittersweet pride. The alliance had been saved, and a new chapter was beginning. But as the applause filled the air, he glanced up at the stars, his heart heavy with longing. It was then that a familiar voice broke the silence in his mind. "You didn't think I'd leave you to finish this alone, did you?" Elias froze, his heart racing. Turning, he saw her, Arava, alive, her silver-hued skin faintly glowing under the lights of the hall. "How?" he began, his voice barely a whisper. She smiled, her usual composure softened by something warmer. "Let's just say the Vacarian survival instinct is stronger than you thought." Elias stared at her, a flood of relief and disbelief washing over him. "You're here. You're alive. And so is the Alliance," she said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "Thanks to us." For the first time in weeks, Elias felt the weight lift from his shoulders. Together, they had faced impossible odds, and together, they would continue to build the future they had fought so hard to protect. In that moment, amidst the crowd and the celebration, they stood as equals, not just as representatives of their worlds, but as partners bound by trust, respect, and something deeper. The stars above seemed a little brighter that night, promising a new beginning for both their peoples and for them.